have a gut level instinct of what's tripping you up on the red line cycle, but you really want to quantify it. You need data that demonstrates to you what you've been agreeing to and under the circumstances to which you've been deviating from your standard provisions. So the first step of the frictionless close system is to review your signed enterprise deals from the past 12 months. You want to be able to review enough agreements that you have a representative sample, so perhaps somewhere between 30 and 50 agreements. If you haven't done 30 deals with enterprise organizations in the past year, then perhaps consider extending the period of review to 18 or 24 months. And if you've done more than 50, then maybe consider a sampling of 50 to 75% of those enterprise deals. Then for each agreement, you're going to identify the buyer's industry, the contract value, whether the buyer perceived your solution to be a nice to have or mission critical, such that if your solution goes down, the lights go off, whether you're handling high, moderate, or low proprietary or confidential information, whose paper the deal was done on, whether you handle, access, store, process personal information, and if so, whose personal information are you handling? And finally, did you do a DPA? And if so, whose DPA did you use? Then you're going to track each provision and determine whether the buyer agreed to your standard provision or if you agreed to a deviation. I'm not going to kid you, pulling this together and setting up the system to track the data and then getting the data into the system is a pretty heavy lift. We've developed a proprietary tool that we use, but you can probably use Excel or Google Sheets or some similar type spreadsheet program. But it is a pretty involved process. However, it will pay off in dividends once you've actually captured and analyzed this information. So let's look at an example of how we track the data. Here we see that we have a standard super cap of $3 million. And we see that in 2 of the agreements, our buyers agreed to the $3 million super cap. But in 1 of our agreements, we agreed to an increased super cap of $5 million. Some of the provisions you're going to track are going to have multiple parts to them. So again, example of limitation of liability, you're not going to track just the amount of the cap, but you're going to also track what events are subject to that cap. So maybe it's a breach of confidentiality or gross negligence. And then in addition to each of the standard provisions in your term, you're going to capture any unique provisions that your buyer imposed. Now that you have all that data into the system, you want to really dig in and analyze under what conditions are you deviating from your standard terms. What do those deviations look like? How frequently are you making those deviations? Do the way those deviations look change depending on certain conditions being present? So returning to our super cap, was there something that made us, something about the deal or the buyer that made us agree to a higher super cap? Was this a one-off occasion, or are there multiple occasions where we've agreed to an increase in the super cap? If there are multiple occasions, then what ties those buyers or those deals together? Is it a higher contract value, a certain buyer profile, or a specific use case? You really want to dig into this data so that you can identify patterns and determine what's going on, because you're going to use that information in steps 2 and 3.